Hey everyone, I'm Rick Beato. What you're about to see is my interview with legendary jazz bassist Ron Carter. Ron is the most important bassist in the history of jazz. He's also the most recorded with over 2,200 recordings. Ron was part of Miles Davis's 1960s quintet, which featured Miles on the trumpet, George Coleman at first, and then Wayne Shorter on the tenor sax, Herbie Hancock on the piano, and Tony Williams on the drums. He's on the records ESP, Four and More, My Funny Valentine, Nefertiti, Miles Smiles. He's on records like Maiden Voyage by Herbie Hancock, or Speak No Evil by Wayne Shorter, or The Real McCoy by McCoy Tyner. He's on pretty much every one of my favorite jazz recordings. He has about 30 some odd solo records, and he's 84 years old. What you're about to hear from Ron is history. It's really the history of music of the 20th century and 21st century. To say it's an honor to interview him is an understatement. Here's my interview.
Ron, I actually met you one time in 1999 at Avatar Studios. You and Elvin Jones in two different rooms playing two different sessions. I was in Studio D. He was playing with Mike Brecker on the Time is of the Essence record. You were in Studio A, I want to say, and I met Michael Brecker the day before. He introduced me to Elvin. I walked downstairs and you walked out of Studio A, I believe it was, and I said, "Oh my God, Ron Carter." And you were the nicest person. I introduced myself. I'm like, "I'm Rick Beato. I'm just such a massive fan." And you were so nice. I talked to you for about 5 minutes.
Okay. I'm still a nice guy.
I know that. My first question to you is, it's 1961. Rock and roll has not been invented. The Beatles were not out. The Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, nothing. Jazz is king. You're in New York City. You've already started your recording career. What does a Saturday night look like in New York City in 1961? Who's playing at what clubs? Was it just, tell me about that.
It was just music, music, music. One of the things that you have to remember back then, Rick, is that there were 3 sets a night. 9, 11, and 1 approximately. And depending on where the club was, in Harlem, the clubs would play Friday and Saturday 4 sets for the 2 o'clock drinkers who were coming off the street. That was 1961. In 1961, a group could work at a club 3 or 4 weeks in a row. Uptown, clubs would work 4 sets Friday and Saturday because the late drinkers would come in like 1:30 and they were really bending their elbow and spending a lot of money. So that was 4 sets Friday and Saturday. What that led to, Rick, it was the younger players got a sense of how to plan a night and how the band leader, whoever he or she was, would plan the sets according to not just the size of the room, the size of the crowd, but who was there. Like the late night set was kind of a real blues kind of set. The early sets were really the complicated forms and a lot of changes because they were there, the earlier sets in the evening.
And those people weren't drinking yet. They were there to listen.
Yeah, they had a taste because they had to have something to drink, but they were basically listeners.
Yeah.
Everybody wore suits and ties. Everyone got dressed for the gig. And the pay was, what's the right word? Minimal or nominal?
For example, would you move from club to club during sets, or you'd play the 4 sets at one club?
I play at one club.
One club.
Yeah, yeah. At the time, you could work in New York forever, and I would do like in the 6 months in New York, I'd work in about 9 different rooms, because there were the duo rooms. Bobby Timmons and Duke Pearson started duo rooms at that time, so there were a lot of duo rooms happening in New York. There were the Blue Note, the Half Note, the Vanguard, Uptown Wells, Count Basie's, the Big Apple, Breakers. There were a lot of rooms to work in New York all the time. There was also jazz on the radio 24 hours. Riverside Church had a great station, WRVR, with a great voice. The guy had a great library and a great sense of commentary about the musicians and who they were and what they were with the last record, I won't say Will Morrow. That was Rochester, New York. He had a great show. Ed Beach, he was New York. There was Daddy O'Daly in Chicago. There was West Coast guy. So jazz was everywhere, man. It was not on TV yet. It was everywhere else. I was working, Randy. I worked at a place called the Fat Spot when it was across from Cooper Union, 3rd Avenue and 5th Street. I worked there for like 5 weeks with Randy Weston. And they had 2 bands. The original Benny Golson Jazz Tet with Addison and Art.
Mm-hmm.
The first Ornette Coleman band in New York with Charlie Hayden, Don Cherry, and Billy Higgins. Kenny Durham had a jam session band with Peg Morrison playing bass, who was one of Randy's earlier bass players. This is all in like a 6-month period of time.
This is unbelievable.
It's 1961.
This is amazing. Okay, let's just go back a little bit. So I'm from Rochester originally.
Okay.
I was born in 62. My dad was a bartender at a place called Squeezers, a jazz club that was open between 46 and 56. And then Beatbox, I think, was the name of the club that opened after that, the same place.
Yes.
And you were at Eastman in the late 50s, correct?
55 through 59.
55 through 59. And then you went to grad school at Manhattan School in 61, but you were playing on records already. I mean, you're on Ron. I mean, to say that you're on my favorite records of all time, I can't even begin, from So Much Guitar, Wes Montgomery, to the Eric Dolphy records that were I think really early records of yours in the early 60s. Pre-Miles, all these famous records, to records, to the Miles records, to the Real McCoy, one of my all-time favorite records.
Let's go back about 2 years.
Yep.
When I got to New York, I joined Charlie Persip. He had a band.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the Jazz Statesmen. And that band had Freddie Hubbard, Ronnie Matthews, Roland Alexander, a really good tenor player from Brooklyn, Charlie Persip, and me. And my first record with a small group was with Teddy Charles, who was producing Bethlehem records. It's called Charlie Persip and the Jazz Statesmen. And at that same time, they had a singer called Nat Wright. His record was called The Biggest Voice in Jazz. And I made one with Howard McGee called Dusty Blue, a couple of records. They were all before 1962.
Yeah.
With Bethlehem. Yeah. So
yeah.
I stumbled on that scene back then, and I got better, I think, as we speak.
5 minutes before I got on, I went and I grabbed this record. Okay. And I remembered that record was actually recorded. 2 records was recorded. That and 4 and More were the same night, and they were just released at different times.
Yes.
I guess 4 and More were the up-tempo songs, and these were the down-tempo songs.
I guess that's correct. I don't know. I know there were 2 different records.
But 2 different records. And so I want to talk about recording in the 60s of live gigs and studio. Okay. Just because this is something I've always wondered about. When you're talking about, live at the Plug Nickel or were any live club that you're recording, did they just have recording machines with, tape machines with everything mic'd up all the time?
Well, Rick, I don't know about many records recorded live, but the ones we did live, we never knew they were recording live.
That's what I wondered.
So we had no idea that the mics would be any different than what they would do for the clubs. I think if we had looked carefully, we would have seen that the bass player had his own mic, and it was not wrapped around the towel between the body and the tailpiece, or the piano may have had a better quality mic on the towel, But again, it was dark in there. We get there just in time to go to work. There was no sound check. The control room was maybe the next block or in the basement. So to answer your question, we had no idea they were recording until we bought the record at the J&R or wherever the Strawberries or wherever the next record store was.
So, Ron, they wouldn't even give you the records. If you're on a Miles record, if it's 4 and More or My Funny Valentine.
I bought them all. I went to the store and bought each one of them.
Of that.
Having said that, having said that,
yes,
I ultimately took the record down to the union and told the guy, this is what we just made. This record came out last week. It was recorded at this time according to the back of the record, and we never got paid for it.
Of course, right?
Well, at the time, of course.
let me just ask you about studio recordings at the time.
Okay.
So did you live at Rudy Van Gelder's studio pretty much? All the records you did you have a bass over there? I mean, you did these.
Well, Rudy and I became good friends because I was out there at a pretty frequent times. For about 6 months, Rick, I would go out to Rudy's on Saturday. I take my sons with me, and they had with the books I read in the corner. We would work on microphones and placement of microphones. And at the time, they were just developing pickups for bass. No one knew how they worked. Their quality was not very good. They didn't know where to put the amp. They didn't know whether to put the pickup on the bridge or on the tailpiece or on the fingerboard. They were just kind of a floundering industry. And Rudy, being the technician he wanted to get the best sound he could. So he had all the latest equipment, the best microphones, the latest microphones, the best control board. And we would spend 2 or 3 hours every Saturday for about 6 months just trying to find where in the room the bass should be. Should it be enclosed? Should it be behind its own box? You know? Ultimately, Cretel said, Rudy, why don't you try to put him in the booth and see how that works? And to this day, that's the best sound of the room.
Okay, so if I listen to the records, the Miles records that you were on with the quintet versus, for example, Speak No Evil or Maiden Voyage, those records, okay, with different leaders, obviously with Wayne or Herbie, how would those recording dates differ from a Miles date that would be recorded in the same place for, if they were recorded in the same place? Would they differ in the setups?
They would differ couple of real major ways. One was that the Wayne records and Herbie records, we would rehearse at some point before the date.
Okay.
There's a place called Lynn Oliver on 87th and Broadway. Alfred Lyons would meet us there. We'd get the music from where the band leader was. We'd rehearse a couple of hours. He'd give us like $75 for the rehearsal day, something like that. And we'd meet at Rudy's the next day or so for the studio. I mean, we would not leave that studio until we finished the record. There was no comeback day after tomorrow or series of records for Lee Morgan's record or Herbie. We would leave the studio with a record. And the understanding was Rudy would also mix the record. He would make the master that night.
Mm-hmm.
There was no outside guy who would walk in and take the tape and go to his studio. No, Rudy wanted it done by him at his facility. With Miles' record, we would go in there not knowing the music, basically. And the first trial was to make sure the parts were correct and they were legible and with the various penmanships and all that kind of stuff. How did it look right? Was the form, the bar lines, We'd take 2 takes and go to the next tune. We would have 2 or 3 days. We have maybe 2 days, depending on how much library there was.
Okay.
But generally it's all 1 day, but no more than a day and a half. 9 to 1, 2 to 5. And maybe the next day, 9 to 5, 9 to 1, and that was it.
Would you ever hear the record again until it came out? Would you guys sit and listen to playbacks ever?
No.
I
seldom do that now.
Okay. And who would make the decisions on the versions if you'd have multiple takes? Would Miles decide?
I have no idea. I'm sure Miles and Tio at the time, who was doing the most of the major producing, they would make the decisions. And at the time, Rick, it didn't matter to me. I thought that they were all equal. And I didn't know what they were looking for with the general record concept. I was never part of that process. I was never asked my opinion. They said, here's this music, guys. Let's make a record. And to this day, that's still okay with me, unless I'm going to be intimately involved with the results, other than trying to play my brains out every night. Is it a record of ballads? Is it a Kurt Weill songbook? Is it a George Gershwin songbook? I mean, those concepts, they were not a part of my process because it had nothing to do with how well I played.
Mm-hmm.
I had control over that, as I still try to, But the idea of who's going to mix and the producer and the artwork and the liner notes, I seldom had a little contact with those people. You make a record and you go to the next one. Yeah, so I would say the project, I said, wow, we were aiming for that. Well, maybe I would have felt differently, but I would have played the same notes.
For example, on Maiden Voyage versus Speak No Evil, you have Tony playing on one, and then you have Elvin playing on another. What is the difference? Can you talk about some of the different drummers that you played with and how you would play differently?
You put me on the spot now because that kind of specificity, regarding those two drummers. If you leave out Max and you leave out Kenny Clark, Connie Kay, and if you leave out Charlie Persip, if you leave out Walter Bolden, if you leave out Gus Johnson, if you don't discuss those guys, that means that they weren't so important to me, and that's not the case.
Well, I was just thinking. Okay, sorry.
Wait. That's the foreground for this answer I'm trying to give you.
Okay.
I think Elvin had a much more weighty bass drum sound. I mean, it was really. I try to avoid the word pounding because it wasn't that, but it was really in your face kind of bass drum because that was part of his tom-tom sound.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Tony had a more feathering kind of touch that better blended in with my placement of the quarter note. You know, and Tony was aware of, well, partly my fault, of how to tune the drums for the bass player. I said, Tony, that floor tom, that Uncle Tom is killing me. Can you make it a different pitch or something, or don't hit it so hard because it's wiping out every note below A. And I like those notes, man. I'm getting pretty good at that shit. Don't do that to me. Oh, right to Tony, please. And he said, oh, okay, you know. And ultimately he understood the better he tuned the drums, it was easier for him.
Right.
Because he could hear every note that I played, whether he liked it or not. They were right on his forehead, right there. You know?
Okay. So we're back then in 64, 65, and you're making records. How far apart are you guys? Are you in an ISO booth then, or are you in the same room?
They were still trying to figure that stuff out. What I would do, Rick, is I'd tell our engineer, I'd get to the date early to see the music and get set up, and I'd tell the engineer, just come out here for me and stand maybe 3 feet away from the bass. This is how the bass sounds in this room right now. How close can you get the same sound on your gear? He said, well, we equalize it. No, I got that. This equalizer right here. Trust me. I know what to do with that, you know? And I'll try to explain to them, Rick, that the bass sound tries to fill the whole environment, the whole room, whatever size that is. When guys say the room sounds too big for the bass, that generally means that by the time the sound gets back to them from wherever it is in this room with the carpet and the people and the seats and the brick and the glass, it's always late because the sound has already decayed that much that the impact of that beat, it disappears by the time it gets back to you. But in a small duo-sized room that's really more compact, the bass sound doesn't have so far to go. And by the time it gets back to you, it still has that impact of the sound of that beat of that note. So I always tell these guys, we have to find a way to not let the bass sound go so far from the instrument where your microphone is located 5 feet away. If you move the microphone to the bass maybe 2 feet away, depending on how much bowing I'm doing, how complex, do I need one stand or 3 stands, those kind of things. If we can kind of do that and kind of force the bass to sound great because it's now closer to the microphone, my job is not so hard, and it is yours. You know, and some guys who didn't believe me, they said, I don't believe that. I said, well, we're early, let's just try a couple of notes, and they would be amazed that I was telling them the fact of the matter. I say, hey, man, that's what I do. My job is to make this as fun for me as it is for you. And if you have scuffling in my sound, no one's going to be happy, least of all the guy who's paying to hear me. You know? So that was the general process. And ultimately they decided to give everybody their own booth, which makes the mixing easier. Everyone's got their own track. There's no bleed-in. The other factors that were involved with the recording itself, not specifically the bass player.
And would Miles be in an ISO booth, or would somebody be in the room? Would you have the drums out in the main room and people be in ISO booths?
Well, you know, we weren't playing that loud in those rooms. Unfortunately, those rooms are all gone, so you can't go see them. But that 230th Street, what a great studio, man. It was just built for recording. And I think back in the day, musicians never played that loud in the room itself.
Right.
You know, now they kind of all over the place, and because there is so much force involved, and amplifiers are really loud and all that stuff that goes along with the current wave of music presentation, they kind of need that separation so that engineers' dials don't stay in the red. Over here, doing like this, you know? So now they have those things out of necessity to give the kind of clarity they need given the volume and instrumentation and stuff like that that makes that kind of separation critical. Given, and now that vinyl's coming back, it's really important to get a good sound because the gear that we have at their houses, man, it's really top shelf, man. They hear everything, man. And now the companies have decided to make them actually go to the house and see the band in their living room.
Did you see the Miles first, the 50s Quintet? Did you go out and see them play? You must have seen them play.
I saw them maybe twice before the band. I saw Philly Joe Jones, Red Garland Band twice, and maybe the Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, Jimmy Cobb live band maybe once, but not really seeing them much. I was working. And they were really working a lot too.
Did you play with Train?
No. At the time his band got hot, Miles's band was working all the time. And of course Train passed away really early, 65, something like that, and Miles's band was just not getting some ink, so we really stayed working on it. Never got a chance. I saw him play live several times at the place called the Half Note, down on Spring and Hudson, down on the waterfront, with Jimmy and McCoy and Elvin, but I never got a chance to play with him.
I've always looked to try and find if you played with Train.
No.
Yet you played with his bandmates so many times.
And with his wife.
And with his wife, yes.
Yeah.
When you would do a date in the same room, I referred to the Real McCoy record, which I love, McCoy's record that has Passion Dance on it. And so it's Elvin and you and McCoy and Joe Henderson. When McCoy is playing the piano in the room and then Herbie's playing the piano in the room, what does it sound like as a bass player with different players playing in the same rooms versus, I mean, is it just a different sound when you're recording?
Well, McCoy is a much louder player than Herbie.
Yep.
Even at Herbie's most forceful volume, he's not playing as physically hard, which is not a disparaging thing to say. McCoy is just a more physical piano player.
Mm-hmm.
When I first made a record with Red Garland, I was surprised how heavy he wasn't. I played with Dave Brubeck when the White House things, when they had just at the White House, maybe Jimmy Carter or something like that. I was surprised how light his touch was based on the records that seemed to be much heavier sounding than a live performance, you know. But getting back to Herbie and McCoy, McCoy is a much more forceful player, you know, and Herbie is a lot less forceful physically, but of course they're both musically important. So
yes.
And they fill the room differently, of course. Sometimes they would leave the top open for McCoy and put a cover so that the microphones, for the sound from the piano, wouldn't get into everyone else's microphones. You know? Or they would just kind of put Herbie's piano lid down on the short stick to control not just how much sound got out of the piano, but how much sound was going back into that microphone. So the engineers are learning as we're flying by the seat of their pants too. You know, we're all kind of learning how to make these records because those records were selling good. There was a big market for these jazz records, and people were getting more sensitive to what they were buying. The price of the records were reasonable. People could afford some really at-home kind of stuff, and they wanted the audience to be able to get the same kind of sound in the studio for them, so they could go home with the record. You know.
I want to say it's 7 Steps to Heaven record that you have 3 co-writes on, or you have is it that record?
Miles Smiles or something like that.
Miles Smiles. You have the song RJ, I think it was,
Mood and 81.
Yes, and 81. So you have 2 co-writes and then one of your own songs on there. Were those the only times you had writing where you had your own music on Miles records?
Yes.
And tell me about the process of that, bringing in a song for consideration to be on a record. Were these things decided beforehand, or would you say, "Hey, I have a song"?
We would go to the date and bring our music. You know, there's a 3 or 4 CD set, Freedom Jazz Dance.
Yes.
Where we walked into the studio and they turned the tape on before we had the instruments unpacked. So the audience gets a chance to hear this kind of discussion. And what I hope they picked up, first of all, Rick, is that Miles was interested in having everyone's point of view. He would say, Tony, play this. And Tony said, you sure you want that? You know, or he would say, Herbie, can you watch this chord? And Herbie would say, yeah, but this may be better. Or whatever our comments responding to his comment to us were not, yes, sir, we'll do this right away. It was, how about this idea? And he was open to those kind of suggestions. And unfortunately, people don't see him as being that aware of other opinions for whatever reason. We were in his band. And he understood that he's hired these people to help him do whatever he thinks he wants to hear next. To get that to come to fruition, he has to allow these guys to do what they do and say what they want so he can find out where they're coming from and how close are they to be on the same page for his view of what he thinks he wants. And unfortunately, there's no common language for jazz.
Right.
There's no phrase that everyone knows, oh, yeah, I mean that. What that involves is a lot of trial and error, I hate the guy say, hey, man, can you play a little more orange over here, a little more blue over there? We get kind of stuck with that kind of analogy because we understand that it's important to communicate verbally. We don't have enough common words to do that. Not really. And I think because the words are so fragmented and so off the wall, it's difficult to tell a guy, I want this, and get it right away. So the process seemed to be, we bring in music to the date, we make sure that we read it through, and we decide what can we do to make this song sound better, whatever that is. And the person who wrote it accepted those contrary voices. He wanted to hear what the band thinks of his tune. He wanted to know how could the band make this song sound good with no rehearsal, no on the gig plan, right in the studio. Wayne, Herbie, me, we trusted each other's point of view to comment on something that maybe wasn't exactly what we had in mind, but I think we exactly weren't sure either. And whatever comments we had from these guys who we trusted with our lives, night in and night out, please, do like that. Help me out here. Reel me in. That.
Are there any moments from records that you remember that if you went back and listened to a record, no matter when it was, you're on 3,000, over, I looked it up, 2,300 records. I bet it's 3,000 records that you've probably played on.
Okay.
Are there moments that you actually remember from the studio, live record, or even a live record that stuck in your mind? Wow, that was amazing. Something that Herbie played, something that Miles played, a phrase that just stuck in your mind that if you listen to today, it brings you back to that moment.
Yes.
Wow. I mean, that you heard it at the time and you just knew.
Yes, it is. Yes. Oh, I heard it after I missed it. I said, how could I not hear that coming? Yes. Yes.
As music progressed, as the years progressed, would the sessions be different in that some sessions you would rehearse for later on, like in the 70s or 80s, when you do the CTI records, for example?
There were no rehearsals for those things, man.
Never. Okay.
No.
So would you just read, or you would know the tunes?
Well, the process generally was that the arranger, Don Sebesky, Emil Diodat, whoever they were, they would bring a sketch of an arrangement.
Okay.
Of course, the leaders would always talk to Don before, so they decided on the library. That wasn't part of my involvement. I would get to the studio, me and Grady and Herbie, whoever it was, and Don would give these sketches, what he thought would work, and the band would play it. And if the band thought that they had something better than what Don wrote, we would play it.
You wouldn't say anything.
He knew it wasn't what he wrote, but it was better than what he wrote. That's why he hired these three guys. And he would take the charts home with the record. And he would add what our view of his arrangement would be like with him reorchestrating it for 8 violins or whatever he would do. Yeah, that was the process back then. Certain guys insisted on hearing their notes that they wrote, no matter how they were not happening. And I'm doing this record date with this person who would remain anonymous or unnamed.
Nameless, yes.
Yeah, that too, yeah. And he presents us with this music, the trio and voice. And after the first 2 or 3 tunes, with the kind of stock kind of arrangements, I decided that I had enough. So after we do 4 or 5 tunes more, and We do the stuff the way I want to do it. I figure that's what I'm here for. You want that? Okay, I can do this, you know. We go to the studio the second day, and this arranger calls me over and says, hey, Ron, sit down. I said, okay, you know. So, you know, I looked at my music yesterday when we got home, and I really like what I wore. I really like what I wrote, you know. And today we're going to do it again, but play what I wrote, you know. I said, look, you spend the budget, but I'll tell you what. I'm going to play your shit until you can't stand it anymore. Then you give me the wink, and I'll do what the fuck I want to do. We okay with that? You know? So, yeah, that's the deal, you know? We shook on it like grown-ups. And so we did the first two tunes as he wanted them. And he came out and said, and remained dear friends to this day. So I learned two things. You got to play what the guy wrote until you can't stand it. And two, be a little more discreet when you think you got something better than he has.
Tell me of
I'm still working on the last part.
Tell me of an arranger that you would come in on a session and they would be really immaculate arrangements. Are there records that you played on that you thought, wow, these were great arrangements?
Oh yeah, Don Savesky, Bob Friedman.
Yeah,
Rich DeRosa did a couple of nice arrangements. Wade Marcus from the day when he was at Motown. Mm-hmm. Benny Golson did some nice arrangements. So they're guys who really put down what they want to hear.
Yeah.
And when you see that, I get amazed that they put it down without at the piano or on their way to the gig or to the, you know, that kind of skill level. It has always amazed me for guys who hear that stuff and write it in the right key, transpose, all that stuff, you know. I can't do that. I can hear that, but I can't write it out like those guys can. So I walk in there and said, man, this guy did have my job. All I got to do is play what he wrote and make him happy. Sometimes.
So Ron, what informed your taste? I'm sure that there were bass players that you looked up to, Oscar Pettiford, whoever they were, Sam Jones, Paul Chambers, maybe. I mean, who were the people that informed you, or that you, or did you just play the notes that you thought were the right ones that worked?
The basic question you're asking me is, what bass players influenced me?
Yeah.
And the answer is none. I was really impressed. I worked in the house band in Rochester when big groups would come in at the Ridgecrest Inn, which is just outside Ridgecrest, New York, just outside of Rochester.
Yeah.
And I was in the house band, so I'd play at the weekends opposite these men, Horace Silver, J.J. Johnson, Carmen McRae, Slam Stewart. They all bring in bands, and I was in the house band, either played with them or as the intermission act. You know? Yep. And I was J.J. came in with a band of Tootie Heath and Tommy Flanagan, a really great band. And I was amazed that J.J. Johnson went past the bell maybe twice for 2 sets, understanding how the trombone worked technically.
Yeah.
I was just amazed that he could find these saxophone-like articulations without going but this far from the bell. It was amazing me, you know. And I said, well, if that's possible, it seems to me that clearly the bass instrument, it seems to me, Rick, that the bass should have that same kind of capacity. If I want to make this stuff work, and if I'm thinking about making a career out of this stuff, I got to be different than everybody else. That's what that is. You know? What does it take to do that? I need my own sound and my own skill level. I hear the notes. I'm not sure what they are because I'm just starting this business and working for a living with these different bands and different concepts and stuff, you know. I know what they do. Can I find them? And can I find what the skill level that allows me to play the equivalent to J.J. Johnson playing across the trombone like this? Can I do that horizontally rather than vertically all night? Because these guys playing 4 sets a night, man. Shit, I need to change shirts by the end of the second set is over, you know? So I got to find out how to do this stuff like J.J. does, the equivalent to the trombone. And I got to have the sound that's equivalent to Cecil Payne playing the baritone. And here I am.
Ron, did you ever get to the end of a night after 4 sets and say, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do this tomorrow? I mean, were your hands, were you just in such good shape that you could just play all night?
Rick, I determined I'm going to be the last guy standing. I don't care how many sets there are. To this day, I'm determined I'm going to be the last guy, man. I have a special toolbox for the late set.
What guys like Herbie brought harmonically to music and Wayne in the mid 60s, new types of harmonies, triads over bass notes and things like that, just new types of sounds. Did you realize that this was kind of a different language, and that your bass parts, like, how would you integrate what you were playing when you were hearing these things?
Well, you asked a question I really can't answer personally, because you have to ask Wayne and Herbie how they responded to my notes. After playing with those guys for 5 years or so, we understood that, I think we plural understood the magnetism of my note choices. And I think they understood clearly that my note choices gave them other options, not just for what chord to play, but where to play it, based on my note choice and where I played my note sonically. What kind of sound that note is, it octave here, down here, that kind of stuff. I think, Rick, what we were evolving at that time was a class of theory every night. Mm-hmm. I think if I could get a simple explanation, we all had our own blackboards. And on our blackboards, we had our own choice of chords for the night. My job, Rick, was to sneak around and get that blackboard first and put my note choices up there before they could put theirs up there. And I was really good at that, man.
Well, the bass is the most important thing. Yeah. I always tell people, forget everything else. Without the bass, you don't know what the harmony is.
Yeah. One of my projects, because I know down the line you asked me, what am I doing since my time off for 16 and a half months,
Yep.
Besides doing like this, I've written a book called Chartography, CHARTOGRAPHY. And what that is, I've analyzed my chorus of Autumn Leaves for 5 choruses for a performance. And I've taken this song for the next 5 performances of this song.
Right.
So that, and they're notated so that the person can really hear how my line affects what Herbie plays, what rhythms Tony plays, and what stuff that ultimately Miles is going to play if he has the nerve to try to get in this stuff, not knowing exactly where it's going to go. And I did this process because I thought that when teachers give a bass player a line to transcribe and understand what it works, that line, Rick, contains more information that the student has not privy to. That bass line depends on how the piano player voiced the chords, what the drummer was doing. Is this the third take of the tune? Is this excerpted from the other foolishness they fooled around with? What makes this chorus so special? And this chartography shows you what makes my notes so special, and you hear Herbie and Tony and Muff responding to my note choices or my rhythm. I look at this occasion and I said, man, these guys were crazy. What's wrong with these guys? And what it shows you, this song being used as a model, if you will, for 5 different performances, maybe 2 or 3 years apart.
Yeah.
It's a perfect storm for us. First of all, we knew every night the first tune would be Autumn Leaves.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you hear no piano, Herbie's trying to hook up his new gear he just bought, and he doesn't get ready till the downbeat of the second chorus. It's just piano, drums, bass, and Miles.
Right.
Or you may not hear any drums because the microphones are just not being put in place. Or we've had no sound check from the airport right to the bandstand. So the conditions were similar enough that this kind of experiment is as pure as you can get to get the point of how we are responding to information that I'm kind of responsible for this tune, Autumn Leaves. I'm trying to set the table. I'm saying, guys, this tonight is my menu. There are no specials, maybe some dessert, but this guys, is the main effing course. Let's go to the table and let's have a good time. And we had some great moments, man.
Everybody that's watching this should follow Ron on Instagram, you're on YouTube, you're everywhere. If you had to go back and say, okay, here's some people that I wish I got to play with, just name a couple people.
Ella Fitzgerald and Ahmad Jamal.
I'm surprised you never played with Ahmad Jamal.
No, well, I see him occasionally. I keep telling him that At this next gig, I'm going to sneak down there and tell this bass player, go watch CNN for an hour, and I got this. He said, yeah, right.
What is the most bizarre gig that you ever played? And there's got to be something that stands out, Ron, that was like, I can't believe I played that gig.
None of them come to mind, Rick, for this reason. You know, I'm teaching private students. I have been for a long time. Mm-hmm. And occasionally student come in and said, Mr. Carter or Maestro, I had a terrible gig last night. And I just stopped that question, you know? I'm not sure that those terrible gigs really exist. And, every gig I play, whatever the level ultimately is decided by someone else, not me, by them, I get a chance to get better at something that I couldn't get better on a hipper gig. Whether it's how to play a two-beat, whether it's how long to make the quarter note rest. You know, I've done a lot of Broadway shows in my career, and the first thing I learned is how to make the note from the bass shorter. They don't want da-da-da. They don't need that. They need dot. Okay, I can do that. I didn't know how to do it. Because I'm interested in having my beat fill up this whole space of the beat, man. That's what I try to do. They want this. You really want that? Yeah. Okay, here it comes. You know? Or a chance to play the bass part correct every time you play it. Not just one time and luck disappears, you know? So I explain to these kids that the gig is only bad as your talent level is. I think I'm a pretty talented guy, so what the guy gives me is a book, you want this? My job is to show you I can do this, whatever it is out of my comfort zone, what you think is my comfort zone. I'm telling these guys, they're all my comfort zones. I know all those zip codes, man. Just give me the envelope. I'll mail it to the mailbox. I got this.
When I was listening to live at the Plug Nickel, I found it fascinating that some of the tunes, like you'd hear Stella by Starlight, and when each person was soloing, there'd kind of be different things going on. Like some of it would sound like it was free almost. And then Herbie would come in and then it would be a more structured kind of thing for a while. At that time, though, that was just another gig, right? Those gigs that you would be playing, all those live recordings, they were literally just, you get to the bandstand, you start playing, you have no idea that these are going to be records that are going to be put out in the future.
That's correct. That's correct. Yes.
I want to ask you one other thing, Ron, about your bass sounds. As recording progressed, you were able to get more bass on records and presence.
Yeah.
Do you ever listen back to an old record? Maybe you never listen to your old records and say, man, I wish the bass was louder on this, or you just kind of accept it for what it is, you know, knowing that how well you can hear your bass on modern recordings or on recordings from the 80s on.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the issues back then is that the bass wasn't, how to say this, the bass wasn't thought to be critical enough to be recorded at a reasonable level. At that time, just like you had Bird, that concept, you had Dizzy, you had Max Roach, you had Bud Powell. These instruments were taking over the development of the jazz scene. Mm-hmm. And the music as well. And I think the bass players at that time, they were replacing either the bass drum, beat, 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 the tuba player from New Orleans, or the mandolin. No one, it seemed to me, were putting forth the interest to help the bass player come along with this development of the music and instrumental. I mean, Bird took the horn somewhere else, man, and Bud Powell was playing runs that no one could play before, you know, and Max was doing stuff on the drum. The instruments were developing along with the music, except the bass players. And I think, Rick, because they were not recorded loud enough because no one thought they were important, the bass and I'm getting out of my expertise of someone else's psyche, but when the bass started being able to rehearse better, the bass started getting better.
Right.
Because those guys and gals, including me, are able to hear just what this guy's trying to play, or this is what he played. Finally, we hear something going on back here. I always say that, come from behind that palm tree. And as the bass was able to be better recorded, and therefore worthy of commanding some serious attention, mm-hmm. Everything changed. The kind of strings guys changed, the height of the strings changed, the harmonic concept changed, whether to play time or no time, that all changed because the bass was now recorded to a level that everybody could hear it, especially fellow bass players.
Well, Ron, I have a million more questions for you that I'd love to ask you, but I don't want to take up your time. You have a master class that you do or a Zoom meeting that you do. Can you tell me about it?
Subscribers to my newsletter, once a month or once every other week, I try to sit down with people who send in questions, and I try to answer them all. I try to assure them that there's not enough time to answer all of them. Yep. If they submit them in written form, I assure you that I will be the guy who's saying yes or no to those questions, and I will get to answer them. And I've had some interesting questions, some a little embarrassing, and some were a lot less embarrassing. Some of my answer was kind of a little more grace, But we do it every other week, and I invite the subscribers to feel free to ask a question, but think it through first. And then we'll try to find some kind of amenable resolve in your question that I almost answered.
Well, I'll put the link in the description
Please.
for how to do that, and I'm gonna put links for your Instagram, for YouTube, for all your for everything. Another point, if I ever get a chance to interview you again, I want to talk about your solo records, and we didn't even get to that, Ron. You have so many great solo records.
We're sitting down right now. Let's kind of take a pen and somewhere on your calendar right now, and we'll do this again when your needle wherever it stops on that date.
Perfect. I'll email you, and we're gonna get this scheduled because I have literally just so many questions that I want to ask you that we didn't even get
I'll
to.
answer all but 3.
Excellent. Well, you've been so gracious, Ron,
Thank
to spend
you.
your time with me today. Thank you so much. I'm to say it's an honor that's not even a word. That's not. I can't even tell you how much this means to me.
Thank you. And I've had fun for 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'll have fun at 9 o'clock the next morning. So don't give me that excuse that's too early for you.
Excellent. All right, Ron. We'll have a great day. We'll talk to you soon. All right.
Good. Love you. Bye.
Love you. You too. Bye-bye.
That's all for now. Don't forget to subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a comment. Check out my new Quick Lessons Pro guitar course that just came out. Also, the Beato book, if you want to learn about music theory, that's how you do it. And check out my Beato ear training course at beatoeartraining.com. And don't forget, if you want to support the channel even more, think about becoming a member of the Beato Club. Thanks so much for watching.